We're all very human and fallible, and yet we live in a society that rewards pretending we're not fallible, or the range of acceptable fallibility is narrow.
We are constantly comparing our insides to other people's outsides and feeling inadequate and guilty, even ashamed.
Trying to blend in means parts of ourselves must disappear, and we must then live in fear that we will be found out.
Here, together, we will create a space where we can laugh, cry, and carry our suffering and hurts lightly.
In the service of being deeply human.
This is Life's Dirty Little Secrets.
Welcome to Life's Dirty Little Secrets. I'm Emma Waddington.
And I'm Chris McCurry. Today it is our great privilege to have Dr. Elisabet Lahti as our guest. She is an awarded educator, international speaker, and founder of Sisu Lab that helps leaders and individuals think deeply about excellence in how we operate as humans and tap into our innate capacity for virtuous fortitude under pressure. She'll talk about her journey into and with Sisu, which will include her running a 1,500-mile, 50-day run across New Zealand, which is an astounding accomplishment. And she's the author of Gentle Power, A Revolution in How We Think, Lead, and Succeed Using the Finnish Art of Sisu, which has just been published by Sound True. So we're very excited to welcome Dr. Lahti.
Welcome.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Emma and Chris. It's lovely to be here.
So Sisu, interesting word. What is it? How would you define it? How do we manifest it? We're very eager to hear about it.
So diving into Sisu, it also means that we're diving into a little bit of history of my native country, that's Finland. And Sisu, it's spelled S-I-S-U, so tiny word, but packs within, I would say, lifetimes sometimes and adventures of lifetimes and such. And Sisu, it denotes this kind of extraordinary determination in the face of extreme adversity. So it is a reserve of strength that we unearth or we tap into when we come to a point during some kind of a adversity or a pursuit. It could also be something we've chosen for ourselves. And we come to a point where our preconceived or assumed capacity seem to have been exhausted and there's nothing left. And Sisu denotes this extra reserve that we tap into at that point. And it's said about Sisu in Finland and about Finns that to understand Finland and to understand Finns, you have to understand the concept of Sisu, that it's been this life philosophy that has helped Finns forge their way through over some really tough times that have included very harsh weather with the early settlers, tough geopolitical tensions in the Finnish history, and things like that. And it is also a concept that is so deeply woven into the everyday life of Finns and how we approach challenges. And at the same time, it's so important to mention that while Sisu is a Finnish word, it is a universal capacity that denotes this life force that activates in those really, really tough moments in our lives.
I like the way in your book you talked about that capacity being unlocked. So it definitely suggests that it's there in all of us, but for some reason it's just not available a lot of the time.
Oh, I love that you approach Sisu from that angle. That really, it always stirs something in me, because instead of looking at Sisu as something that, oh no, we need to find it, we need to go search for it, it's lost. The point and the direction where I come from is that we're all born with this quality. It is within us. And when we look into the eyes of a newborn baby or into the eyes of a toddler or a child, and anyone who's ever looked into those eyes or is a parent knows that that child and that baby is not a tabula rasa, an empty board, but that there's so much in there already. And one thing that is in there, in addition to a small child, how they are, they're playful, they have that hopefulness, they have the curiosity, the awe, but there's also that spark of life force. So I almost see it as, I use this metaphor from my native culture of the snow lantern. And it is something that we do in the winter sometimes, that you build a snow lantern so that you place the light in the middle first. And that symbolizes the life force, that we're all arriving, and we arrive here with this life force and this unbridled ability to happen to life. But then in the snow lantern, you make these snowballs, and then you start to place them in a circle, one round first, and then you place another round of these round snowballs around the light, and then you finally place the top one, so that you have this beautiful lantern. But what happens is that ultimately you have the light twinkling from these little coals in the lantern. And that sometimes happens to us, that this natural life force and Sisu and light that we have, it gets locked in. And then that's where we as a human collective, we come into play, that how we are with each other, we actually have a lot to say and a lot to do in how we can help unlock, or in a way, I would say melt that snow lantern with human warmth and how we treat each other, so that we can all have more access to this capacity that we have.
I love that. So beautiful. And I love the idea, again, this unlocking, because if I think of myself, anybody who's been a parent knows what that life force is like. Like that, you're exhausted and yet you can still get up at night and feed the baby, or you're working full time and you get a call from school, you got to pick them up, and then it turns out you don't have any food at home, and then suddenly you got to go to the shops and you have a child who's really upset and sick in the back. I mean, somehow we find it within us. And I think the first time I really noticed it was as a parent. Like, I always used to think I was a bit meek when it came to not being able to survive without sleep, or not being able to eat regularly wonderful meals, or all these things that I thought I really needed. And I came to realize, no, I didn't really need all this thing. And I could actually do a lot more. I was a lot stronger than I thought I was when I had something so important to look after and to care for. So yes, I do recognize that there is a process of unlocking, that we can surprise ourselves, that there is this inner force, this life force. And parenting is just one example, but your running of marathons is a fantastic, phenomenal example. I think finishing a thesis is another incredible example of requiring real life force. That we have those, but we often don't reflect. I don't think of them as life force. I think of them as just something I need to do, which takes away the beauty.
Parenting is truly, I would say, one of the best examples. And also for the reason that it's such like unsung courage, an unsung life force, that we take it for granted that people have children and they show up for the children. And we rarely pause to actually celebrate that, how much it takes to do all that. Like, life ultimately is the ultimate ultra marathon. So we're all on it. And similar principles often apply, as if one was running a real ultra marathon on highways. We need to look at how we're doing self-care. So self-care is a major component of Sisu. It's almost like it's the foundational piece that with which we can help our life force, that we can look at those spots where we contract, where do we don't allow ourselves to recover. There's a lot that we can actually do to allow that life force to flow. And the most simple way how I sometimes speak and advise people how to unlock the Sisu is simply to have a little inventory of our lives and look at those parts that if life force, is pumped through the heart, if we think of a blood vessel, the same way these vessels of our life force, where it might be squeezed. And that could be a relationship. It could be a truth or an experience we haven't shared. So there's something that's holding us back. or it could be that we need to actually reorganize our daily lives a little bit better so that we do get that rest and recovery that we need. So there are many, many little areas that we can open, these micro areas of Sisu, or bigger ones.
And you mentioned in the book, as you start to explore this, or if one should start exploring this, the choosing a practice carefully. And Emma and I did a podcast with Leidy Klotz, who wrote a book called Subtract, and all about the power of doing less or subtracting and not trying to just add on and add on and add on. So if someone were to say, well, I'm going to start implementing this, where might they begin and how should they begin? You mentioned self-care, and you talk in the book that self-care is self-power. But, if somebody's, listening to this podcast were to say, okay, how do I begin? What would you suggest?
Well, this could be an easy answer or a little bit complex, because it's very personal what those areas might be. And for that reason, I want to just mention that one part of Sisu that is so important to bring into a little bit of into the conversation and the dialogue is that it also starts with awareness. So it is the old ancient Greek wisdom that's carved in the Temple of Delphi, which goes, know thyself. It all starts with this, to know thyself, to be able to look within and use our awareness to pause enough so that we simply first even take the time to look at how are we doing. So the first step for anyone to do, I would say, is to simply carve out a little bit of time and to pause. Take maybe, a notebook and start to journal about these areas of life where you might feel a contraction versus where's the life force actually flowing. And with that process, we can start to have a little bit of a more intimate conversation with ourselves, which is really, it's waiting for there to happen. And the only problem often there is that there's so much happening in our lives that we don't necessarily remember to take the time simply to look within and ask. Just like Sisu is a capacity that lives within every single individual on this planet, this wisdom is something that we all carry, and it is waiting for there to be tapped. So I wouldn't say that there are some super great magical tools that are that they create some kind of a feeling of reverence, but they're actually very simple. It's often really coming back to the basics. And Sisu is a really, really basic quality. It goes to our life force, and it's as old as the sun, as one would say, in that sense.
I'm curious. I'm just thinking as I listen to that, it reminds me, Chris and I use a model called acceptance and commitment therapy.
Yes.
And if you're familiar, you know that one of the key processes or key concepts that we talk about a lot is values. Is this our meaning, our purpose, how we want to move our body, our world in ways that are really important to us. And as I was listening to you talking about Sisu and finding our sort of life force, I'm wondering how much it relates to the concept that we would, in our work think of as values, like really finding that meaning, that purpose, what's truly important to us. Because it sounds quite aligned.
Yes, no, I think that's a very good angle to bring to it. I recently did an exercise where I did that with my own life. And what I discovered was diving back into my values. It's good to reevaluate our values sometimes and go back and see what's alive right now. And for me, what came out was that a very important value for me is to be able to be present for myself, to be able to be really present for the people who are near me, who are close to me. And so if I act according to my values, then I also align my life force in a way that I do take that time to cultivate that peacefulness. So then I do show up for my meditation practice. I do show up for my daily little moments where I just take a moment to pause and I see and I feel into like, where am I coming from? And these become then non-negotiables for me. Things that I will keep in my daily life and in my practice at all times. So I really love that you brought values, because that can be a really core tool actually to apply also in this work with checking in, where are we with our life force and with our Sisu.
And that non-negotiable aspect of it is the commitment part of acceptance and commitment therapy, where we resolve to take that path. And of course, it's not going to be perfect. It's committing and recommitting all the time, but it's good to keep that intention in the, as our compass heading.
Yeah, perfect.
And I know you mentioned the 3 themes of Sisu.
Yeah, the 3 themes of Sisu, they derive from the early part of the research. So I started something about like 10 years ago. And the start point for the research was to really ask that, what is Sisu? Does it even exist? Is it simply a narrative that Finns tell themselves and it somehow just stays alive? And is Sisu only a Finnish quality? What is it? And so to get started, I had to first do a kind of a mapping of the concept. So I did a survey at the beginning, received over 1,000 responses. And then from those responses, I conducted a thematic analysis. And so these 3 key parts of Sisu come from that data. And the first one is what I call extraordinary perseverance. So it denotes this idea that Sisu is something that begins at that point that I mentioned, where we feel that we have consumed all our capacities. But then there is this extra reserve or a tank of energy that we tap into. So therefore the term extraordinary perseverance. So we go beyond what we thought we are capable of. Like Emma was saying about parenting, that you discovered something within you, that you had more strength than you actually thought you had. And then the second one is what I then labeled as action mindset. And action mindset is this approach toward challenges where, instead of shying away or contracting when we are faced with something that seems to be greater than we are, or that we don't immediately seem to have the resources for, we lean forward. So we lean into the headwind, into the uphill, instead of turning away. And so you could also describe it as this consistent, courageous approach toward challenges. And this is quite significant, actually, to have this kind of mindset, because throughout the history of humankind, all the progress we have made, all those times that we have taken action against all odds, as one could say, or we have had the courage to strive and reach for something that we thought was maybe even impossible. So having this action mindset is very crucial to us as a species, as individuals, so that we go into the unknown. And this unknown can be a business idea. This unknown can be a new relationship. It could mean to end a relationship. It can have so many different purposes. And I think in this time that we are now as a human family, it's going to be very important that we boldly do what needs to be done right now within our own personal development and as a collective, so that we come together, so that we can steer this boat of human family into a direction that there's more flourishing and there's more opportunity and more healing for all of us. And then the third one I labeled as latent power. And the word latent is there because Sisu is not a quality that's just available at all times. Sisu is something we tap into in those moments of adversity. So it always requires that some kind of a activation. And of course, it's very subjective where the Sisu begins for someone. And even for an individual, what will require Sisu will vary throughout their lifetimes and even during different days, I would say. But this latent power refers to Sisu as a kind of embodied somatic fortitude. So more visceral rather than describing it as mental toughness. Sisu points away to I would even say it, a power circuitry that is not just cognitive, but it relates to this field of research with embodied cognition, in which we trace our emotions into the physical and the embodied states that we have. And that way, it's also very different from our traditional that we describe as grit, which is passion and perseverance for long-term goals, or perseverance, which is to endure frustration and keep on going day after day, despite frustration and setbacks. And then resilience, which is to bounce back from adversity, which are usually described as cognitive qualities. But Sisu is one of these concepts and words that actually adds to our understanding how do we approach these energies and this strength through the body. And in the future, maybe there's research on understanding how the enteric nervous system, how our gut brain, and all of these play into this really complex and so fascinating experience of being a human and overcoming and enduring.
And that ties in with the action orientation, because very often we're taking leaps of faith, and that leap just kind of comes from the viscera, and it's like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm doing it. And very often the cognitive stuff, gets in the way. In acceptance and commitment therapy, we often talk about verbal behavior and how that can tie us into knots and keep us from doing the things that we need to do.
I like, Chris, that you used the word pairing of the leap of faith. That really comes to this area of Sisu, because it's those moments when we need to do something when we don't yet have the proof that we will know exactly what to do and how to do it. The road might look that it's completely dark. It is about taking that step into the unknown, and then the road appears. So that is very much this Sisu, which is such a deep part of being a human. I mean, we all need to take those first steps, and then every journey of 1,000 miles, as the old Chinese saying goes, it starts with that first step.
So you've been studying Sisu now for a decade longer, and you still have such passion and curiosity about it. What is it about Sisu, or what do you bring to it that has kept you so engaged and joyous in this pursuit?
I think it is that Sisu, to me, is so much more than just a concept. I could look at it as a psychological concept and see it from different vantage points and define it, and then maybe buy some kind of tools from it. But there's a deeper quality to Sisu than just this conceptual character, in which when a person decides to live their life or include Sisu into their reflections and how they look at life, it offers an invitation to really take those leaps of faith. And it is a very dynamic process, because Sisu is about doing what we feel is almost impossible. So there is constantly this relationship that will challenge us to grow and to shine a light in those areas of us that are a little bit in the dark. And a lot of these areas have to do with our sense of personal power. What are these areas where I still hold almost these like anchors that are stuck in the ocean floor. So for me, Sisu has been this ongoing process and a journey to really investigate and get to know myself. And there are always these kinds of new angles where I can look at this, how I'm growing and where do I contract? Where do I now have the courage to open to life's new invitations and challenges? And this links to this personal approach that I have for life, in which I look at the life as this dojo. And dojo is a word from Japanese, which means the training ground or place of training. Mm-hmm. And when you are in a dojo, your training partner or your sensei, the teacher, is the person with whom you train. And so I've used that to model it in my personal daily life as looking at every person, looking at every obstacle, every encounter as my training partner. So it opens and it holds this hand for me, and then it's my turn to reach it. And then we do a dance. We see, how do we play the energy together? How do I rise when I fall, when I'm tossed by life a little bit? Mm-hmm. Can I gently and slowly learn to rise up more gracefully? What is the kind of training I need to do? Where do I need to commit a little bit more? Or where do I need to be more gentle on myself? And maybe take a break and just admit that, okay, I need to get back to this later, and this is fine how it is. So it is such a dynamic play with life to have this dialogue with our life force and to have it with Sisu. So because Sisu is now so much in the news, there's a lot of articles being written about it. What I sometimes see that it's a little bit hyped, or it is taken as a very thin idea of just unlock your Sisu and just go into it and do it. But Sisu, really to understand it, it is to have this humility in the face of life and understanding that we are so strong and we're so fragile at the same time. Mm-hmm. And as we go into this place, there's so much that gets unlocked of us and just understanding the humanity of who we are. And that at best can also be a birthplace of more compassion amongst each other. So we understand that we're all on this dojo and it's not easy for anyone. And the more we can learn from each other, more we can keep our heart open as we go through the motions. I think there's a lot of beauty and growth that we can then acquire and then share.
And it's endlessly fascinating. There's always something new to discover.
That's the thing. Yes.
I loved one of your quotes, and it kind of follows on from what you just said, that in the book you talk about how you've always been curious to find ways in which we can turn adversity into fuel. And yeah, that's quite empowering, because obviously, there is, like you say, we have a lot of, in our dojo, we do get flung around and we do come up with a lot of adversity, be it internal or, the world in relationships. So could you tell us a little bit about, this curiosity that you have about turning adversity into fuel?
And curiosity is such a fantastic word and a way of being to bring into this conversation. It's something that is my personal tool, and I do use it very consciously a lot and often. In moments when life gets really challenging and something is going on, if I can ask myself, what can I learn? What is something I can learn through this experience and through even a challenging situation, a teacher that's a little bit tough right now? It can bring me from this contracted place of fear or some kind of a very negative downward spiral of thinking with a relatively modest amount of effort. It's pretty hard to go from fear to happiness. It's a really broad leap. No one should even expect that from ourselves. But opening the door a little bit with curiosity will allow me to take that next first step and keep the journey going, which is an advice that I received from from this very seasoned Ironman triathlete before my first Ironman. I'd never done one before. And I asked him after, with his experience of maybe 20 Ironmans, I said, well, what is your advice that you would give me? And he said the day before the race that no matter what happens, just keep moving. And no matter how slow, you can slow down the pace, but just keep the body moving, even if it's a very gentle, slow movement. And I think it actually, at the end, is what got me through the Ironman. It is what got me through the dissertation and the run, and a lot of working through my personal trauma. You know, it's really simply to keep that openness. And curiosity is a gentle way of doing that, because all it requires is for me to, in a way, to keep breathing, and as much as I can to keep that heart open. And at all times, there is so much wisdom that is seeking us. And when we do that thing of slowing down, sometimes it's good that we need to slow down. That's what I've also learned with life, that I'm not afraid of that anymore either. But I appreciate that you mentioned this quote from the book. It is a question that lies in the heart of that very onset of when I started to research Sisu, which was after a personal trauma that I had come out of. And I started this very long journey to healing. And this question that was keeping me up at nights was, first, how do humans overcome extreme adversity? Like, what do we unearth, and from where? What is this energy? Who has it? Who doesn't have it? What can we learn from those who have overcome? And the second part of this question was, because adversity is so, unfortunately, so abundant in this world, and no one can really avoid it. Well, how could we, or could we, turn adversity into fuel, that we actually get to use it? And there is something about this idea of looking at life as this great teacher and this dojo, where I do get to choose my attitude. I do get to choose my mindset. And this never means that we need to romanticize adversity or trauma. It never means that we need to bypass these emotions that we have. But that is a power that I do have, that with enough time, with enough recovery sometimes, I do get to look at the world and see what I can learn from it. And I do get to choose how I tell my story as well. That is in my hands.
Nice. So curiosity is a pivot from distress to openness and movement. You know, I would often tell my clients that curiosity is what got us out of cowering in our caves eons ago when eclipses happened or lightning or whatever. Somebody said, this is kind of interesting, and started exploring these phenomena and learning about them and being able to predict them. And that helped us emerge as a species from when we were terrified of everything that happened around us. And I mentioned a quote from Dorothy Parker to Emma the other day. She said, "The cure for boredom is curiosity. There is no cure for curiosity."
I like that.
Yeah.
And I like, Chris, how that's wisdom, that you are able to summarize my quite lengthy answer and you bring it to curiosity is a pivot. That was beautiful. That's what it is. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, good.
Amazing.
Yeah. So one of the things that we were talking about before we hit the record button was Sisu and leadership. And I wonder if you could spend a little time talking about that.
Would you mind, actually, Emma?
Yes.
Would you read that little part that you quoted? Because I think it's going to give a nice runway.
Absolutely. So this is a quote from your book, which resonated a lot with me. This is a quote from your book that resonated a lot with me. So, leadership is one of the most courageous, demanding, and in my opinion, rewarding paths to self-discovery. Just as parenthood or any other relationship intimate enough to regularly pose a threat to our ego, leadership has a way of undressing our facades and triggering core fears.
Yes, that calls for a pause and a moment of silence. Yeah, it's a humbling path.
Yes.
Just like Sisu is a humbling path because it's so raw and so honest when we are going in those and through those adversities and trials and transmuting them into triumphs often as well. In some ways, if I'm kind of just freestyling with this a little bit, both Sisu and leadership, they almost like somehow they feel that they're a little bit synonymous in some ways, in that everything we do is interwoven into this idea of that we have this life force and this something that sparks within that keeps us going. And at the same time and simultaneously, leadership is interwoven in everything that we do. So it's something that I speak of in the book, in Gentle Power, that leadership is never just something that some group has somewhere, or a minority or a majority in some context, but it is a emanation, and it is part of who we all are, because wherever we go, we are leading that space if we consciously choose to do so. I mean, that's maybe one of the most unearthed resources and reserves of our time, to choose to be consciously a leader, lead our family, consciously cultivate energy where people can feel safe, where our workplaces could be healing places, thinking of the leader as a healer, and first and foremost, really leading ourselves. So self-leadership is something that I most often, or I think always speak of when I speak of Sisu. And it is an invitation to go into those, maybe the most scary parts of us, and to have that. We need Sisu to have that courage to look ourselves in the eyes, and also even look at how the world is right now, so we don't hide away from the threats also that we're seeing around us. But Sisu acts as a catalyst, or a force that fortifies us, so we can look things clearly in the eye and not hide away, or also not be ignorant, so that we stay in this kind of alignment. And that's self-leadership, to choose to be present in this dialogue of humanity in this time and era, and that I stay in dialogue with myself, that I don't leave this inner council that I have. Like, I have this imagined council that I imagine in my head, and it has 20 seats, and this is my imagined tool that I use. And in each seat, there is a person either from the past, or it could be someone who's alive. There's Maya Angelou, for example. There's William James. There's my grandmother, and many others. And then one seat is reserved for me. So no matter what happens, under no circumstances am I allowed to leave that seat. I need to be part of that dialogue. And that, to me, is a way how I combine that Sisu, that I have the courage to stay there, and also bring in the self-leadership, that this is what I do as a human.
Yes.
And in the time we have left, speak to where Sisu can become problematic. There is a dark side, or a shadow side to Sisu, from what I understand.
Oh, yes. Very important topic. To draw from my research a little bit, to start, there are these 3 different areas where Sisu can become really problematic, and this is derived from the analysis that I did. And one is that when we have too much Sisu, which is what I call the dark Sisu, which is the opposite of Sisu in its constructive expression, as in its high expression, as what I call warm Sisu, or what I call gentle power. So in its dark expression, Sisu becomes very harsh. It becomes merciless. It is us overextending ourselves. And so what it means is that this capacity that can actually be the springboard, and it can be this quality that allows us to exceed ourselves and find these capacities within us that are way more than we thought. The same capacity can also prevent us from achieving those things that we want to achieve. So, and there's a huge tendency sometimes in humans because of as a trauma response or because of the cultural pressure that we might be facing, or for many reasons, to overdo things. So one is that Sisu as a harmful quality, it is harmful to the individual themselves, which means that I overexceed myself. I push way beyond that is actually good for me. So here's the thing, that we are not machines. Sisu is not a limitless power, but that's why it's always also an invitation to have this very honest conversation with ourselves, to know that where do those limits go, and because they're also a breathing and they're changing. So where are these limits right now? So it's this eternal question for, I think, every individual, that where to stop, where to push more. And there's no one size fits all answer to this. And this is part of the idea of know thyself, so that we have to have this very deep, inner, intimate dialogue with ourselves, so that we learn to know that where do we go with this what's too much. So it can lead to burnout, overextending ourselves and really depleting ourselves to a point that it's very harmful. So Sisu is a reserve that we borrow from our bodies, so to speak. So we have to also, in a way, put it back by repairing ourselves with rest. And then the second part is that Sisu in its harmful expression becomes harmful to our environment, which means the people we're in contact with. For example, if we're working in teams in the workplace, there are these comments from the respondents which said that people with too much Sisu can become merciless, as they impose these really high standards or even harsh standards that they have for themselves, and they impose them on other people. One person gave an example of one of their parents, who was a top athlete and very inspiring person, but also extremely harsh as a parent to this person, who was carrying this narrative throughout her life that she just was not enough. And it was this harsh Sisu that this parent had that influenced her in a depleting manner. And then it robs our sense of psychological safety, which we know that we need to be creative, which we know that we need in order to be safe with one another. And all those good things come from that place. And then the third one is that Sisu as a harmful quality, when it goes into its shadow, it becomes stubbornness. So it impedes with our process of thinking, where we're able to have a dynamic interaction, an interplay with our environment, where we notice where we need to change our plan, where we need to maybe do something differently. I sometimes say that it might, in some occasions and from some people, require more Sisu to give up than to continue, even if we really adopted that kind of way of moving onwards. So healthy Sisu is also includes our ability to think with reason as well. So these are the three different ways, and it's not a bad idea to even, maybe if one is journaling, to look at these areas of how do I recognize when my Sisu becomes too merciless toward other people, or it becomes too hard on myself. So that can also reveal some of these aspects of how healthy is my Sisu. Excellent.
And once again, the book is Gentle Power, a revolution in how we think, lead, and succeed using the Finnish art of Sisu. And I think perhaps the dirty little secret is that gentleness is not weakness, that gentleness is very powerful. And, within, as you just described, the parameters of, do no harm.
Yes. I love that idea that we can mistake gentleness as weakness. It's particularly when it comes to leadership. Just listening to you talk about the dark side of Sisu, that kind of striving and becoming merciless is a real problem in leadership. And we're witnessing it in the world today. There's too much of that kind of Sisu and not much recognition of how much power there is in gentleness and in compassion and in leaning into those parts of us. Yeah, lovely title to your book. It's really wonderful. And it's been a great conversation. Thank you so much. I've learned a lot.
Thank you. This has been marvelous.
Thank you so much. It was really lovely to explore Sisu and this, I would say, the new paradigm of this power that's rooted in gentleness.
Thanks so much for tuning into the Life's Dirty Little Secrets podcast.
If you have any feedback for us or secrets for future episodes, you can email us at lifesdirtylittlesecretspodcast@gmail.com.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Life's Dirty Little Secrets or on Facebook at Life's Dirty Little Secrets Podcast.
We invite you to follow, rate, and review us on wherever you listen to this podcast. It is the best way to get our podcast out in front of new listeners.
We'll be back in a couple of weeks with more.
See you then.